Hello everyone, it's Anissa from Color On Magazine and the Absurd Coloring Series, and today I wanted to talk to you about paper quality and how it affects your coloring. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures that I've colored, and as I'm flipping through them and explaining what I use to color, I want you to try to guess, before I tell you, what type of paper it was colored on. Okay, so this first one is from the December issue of Color On Magazine, and I used a combination of pastels, Prisma pencils, Mr. Sketch markers, and Sharpie markers, and it was colored on cardstock. So this one is from Fairy Trimmings, and I used mostly Prisma pencil crayons and some Crayola pencil crayons, and it was colored on just regular old printer paper. This one I used Prisma, Mr. Sketch, Chameleon, and some gel pen. And that was from the July issue of Color On, and it is Create Space. This is from the Hillbillies Chromatomes, and I used Prisma pencil crayons. It is Create Space paper, thinner paper. If you don't know, if you're not familiar with Create Space, that means that it's thin paper compared to cardstock paper. So this is Stitched Patchwork World. I used Chameleon markers, and it was colored on cardstock. This one is drawn by Sue Chastain. It is in the Adult Treasury 1, I believe, 2 possibly, Adult Treasury 2. It was colored with Prisma markers and highlighters, just regular Sharpie highlighters, and it was Create Space paper, thinner paper. This is from Stitched Patchwork World, Chameleon markers, cardstock. This is Terry Sherman from the Adult Treasury 1. And I used Prisma pencils, Chameleon markers, and Sharpie markers, I believe. Create Space paper. This one is from Baby Absurdians, and I used a combination of Sharpies, Prisma pencil crayons, Crayola pencil crayons, highlighters, and gel pens. Cardstock. This one is from Whimsical Garden Gnomes, I believe, by Chromatomes. I used a combination of pastels, chameleons, Sharpie, gel pen, and Prisma pencil crayons, and that is Create Space thinner paper. This one is from Stitched Patchwork World, Chameleons, and it's on cardstock. This one is from the Adult Treasury 2, I believe, by Jenny, and it was done with Chameleon markers on thin paper, Create Space paper. This is from Color On Magazine February issue, and it was done with Prisma, colored on cardstock. This is from Sheila's book, Weirdlings and Wildlings, and it is a combination of Sharpie markers and Prisma pencil crayons, and it was colored on Create Space paper. And this last one is from Baby Absurdians with Sharpie, Prisma, pencil crayons, gel pens, and pastels, and it was done on cardstock. So my point here is that you can still get the same technique using thin paper versus thicker cardstock paper. Does it bleed through on a thin paper? Absolutely, it does. Does it bleed through on cardstock? Yes. If you're using a wet medium, it's always going to bleed through. So that's something that you just need to get in the habit of sliding that extra sheet in behind to protect your next page. You know, if it's a double-sided book, obviously you're going to only be using pencil crayons or something like that anyway. But, you know, with the thinner paper, you're able to still blend and shade, you know, get bright colors. You can use any kind of medium that you want. I think that really it boils down to the technique that you're using and the supplies that you're using. So, you know, Prisma pencils are a higher quality, and they work quite well for blending, which is one of the main reasons that I use them. But I also use Sharpie, and I use Crayola Twistables, and those are all quite inexpensive, and they work very well on any paper type. Chameleons work. You can see that the shading works quite well on the thin paper, and versus the cardstock, you can see that, you know, it comes out the same. I'll show you side by side with Prisma pencil crayons. on cardstock and on CreateSpace thin paper. And you can see that the shading and the blending, and I think I even used the Sharpie tip in this section here. All of it works quite well. So that said, what do I personally prefer? I do use cardstock probably more than I use CreateSpace paper. That's for a few different reasons. Sometimes as I'm drawing my books, I'm also coloring them before they go into production so that I have something to show you when they all come out. So I print them on cardstock. The other reason is that cardstock is slightly easier to blend pencil crayons with. And by slightly, I mean very, very slightly. But, you know, you don't have to put in a whole lot of extra elbow grease to get the shading that you want on the CreateSpace paper. That's really the only reason that I use cardstock more than I use CreateSpace. But I would never not buy a book from an artist that I like because it was printed on CreateSpace paper or thinner paper. I also wouldn't buy a book specifically because it was on cardstock paper. I would buy, the reason that I buy books is strictly for the image, and then I just work with whatever paper quality is in it. So I would love to hear more from you guys and see what your experience has been with CreateSpace paper, the thin paper, versus cardstock or thicker paper. I'd like to see your pictures in the comments below. And before I go, I just wanted to say, you know, don't be afraid to contact an artist that is active on Facebook or an independent artist. Typically, a lot of us will respond quite quickly, and a lot of us have different options available. So for myself, I sell in a cardstock spiral bound version. I sell in a regular CreateSpace thinner paper version, a micro version, and even a PDF version, so that if you have a specific paper quality that you like or type of paper, the PDF allows you to print on anything. Okay, so I hope that this was helpful, and yeah, I would really like to sort of bust that myth on paper quality and thinner paper being not as good as thick paper.